In the last lecture, we assumed that the value that we receive here is a valid string. But what would happen if we pass a Boolean here? That doesn't make sense, right? So let's run this code. We get this error, uncaught type error, value.split is not a function because split is a method that belongs to strings. Booleans don't have a split method, right? What would happen if we pass null or undefined? Save the changes, we get a different error. Cannot read property split of null. Again, for the same reason, we cannot call the split method on a null. It's only available on a string. So here we need to add error handling. Typically, in situations like this, we should do error handling at the beginning of a function or a method. This is what we call defensive programming. So we want to make sure that the values that are coming in are valid, they're in the right shape, so we can execute our logic. So the first line of this method should be something like this. We want to make sure that this value is a string. So we can use the type of operator. If type of value is not string, then one simple approach is to return. And with this, we'll no longer see this error message here. Save the changes so we can see the person object with the original first name and last name. So what we passed here, null, did not take effect. But sometimes we want to report an error in our application. That's where we need to throw an exception. Throwing an exception is a technical jargon that you might hear in a lot of programming languages. So let's see how that works in JavaScript. So instead of returning from this method, we use the throw keyword and then create a new error object. So new error, that looks familiar, right? So error is a constructor function because here we have the Pascal case and we're calling this function using the new operator to create a new error object, right? Now, as an argument, we can pass an error message. So value is not a string. So this is how we throw an exception. Now, some people confuse errors with exceptions, but there is a slight difference between the two. Here we can create an error object. Let's call that E, new error. This is just a plain JavaScript object. There's nothing special about this. But the moment we throw this error, we refer to that as an exception. So this is an exceptional situation that should not have happened. Okay. Now, in this method, we have some basic error handling. So this method is throwing an exception. Now somewhere else, we need to catch that exception. We need to catch that. And quite often when we catch an exception, we display an error to the user. So this is how we accomplish this. Line 15 is where we receive this exception. So we need to wrap this line in a try block. So try, remove this line here. So a try block can have one or more statements. One of these statements at least can throw an exception. Now, we add the catch block after. In parentheses, we give an identifier. This is the error object that we are throwing here. So in the catch block, we can get that error object and do something with it. So here, we can display it on the console. But as you know, this is only visible to developers, so an end user will not see this error. So temporarily, we can use the alert function. This is not something that I recommend you to do because that's a very old and poor way of reporting errors to users. The proper way is to display a label, perhaps a red label on the user interface. But that's a topic for a future video. So for now, let's just use the built-in alert function. Now, save the changes. And here's our alert. Value is not a string. Now let's take this to the next level. Instead of passing null, I'm going to pass an empty string. Save the changes. We don't get any errors, but first name is an empty string and last name is undefined. Again, that's not desirable. So ideally, we want to make sure that our user is typing a first name and last name. So when splitting that string, we can check the length of this array. So if part.length is not 2, that means something is missing. So here we can throw another exception, throw new error with a different message. enter a first and last name. Okay, now save the changes. And here's our new exception. Enter a first and last name. So basically, when we throw an exception, the lines after the throw statement are not executed. We'll jump out of this method and the control will move to the catch block. Here we catch the exception and do something with it. So this is the basic of error handling in JavaScript.